Welcome, and we'll start off with our bracha. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
And we will go into I'll make sure, let's go for the screen share. And that's where it is. And here we are. So we're going to look at the next verse, and Rashi, interestingly enough, you'll see, sort of gives us that citation of Rabbi Meir. He doesn't necessarily name the source, but we know that from the Torah Tamima text. How's that for crazy increase of size here? Wow. There we go. All right. Ze yitnu. This is what they shall give. Kol ha'over al ha'pekudim, all those who pass the enrollment, through the enrollment. Machatzit hashekel, 1/2 shekel, b'shekel hakodesh, of the holy shekel. Esrim geirah hashekel, it's 20 geirahs. Machatzit hashekel, that would be, it's not going to be, of course, so we're talking about 10 geirahs, in other words. Machatzit hashekel, 1/2 shekel, truma lashem, a truma lashem. So even though Rashi doesn't talk about it, it certainly has sort of crossed my mind why 10 shekels, why dafka 10 shekels? And I can think of a few ideas. One is the 10 commandments. Observing the commandments also is a protection and a clothing to us. You can see commandments as being spiritual clothing, but the fact that it mentions half is that for us to recognize that there's a limit to our individualism, that as in actual fact, each one of us is incomplete, and that it's only when we are in community that there's a possibility of us becoming complete, but not to put the individual above everybody else. So some thoughts involved in reflecting on the Chatzi HaShekel. So ze yitnu. So there we have this word ze, right? The demonstrative pronoun. This is what they shall give. And he actually quotes, Rashi quotes here, Shemot Rabbah, the Midrash on Shemot, the great Midrash on Shemot. Here alo, he showed him, Kemin matbea shel eis, there we go with the hologram again, a coin of fire, umishkala machatzit hashekel, its weight being the 1/2 shekel, v'omer lo, and God said to him, kazeh yitnu, this is what they're supposed to give. Showed it to him. So ha'over al ha'pekudim, those who pass through or on the enrollment. The kod means to take note of, the accounting, something like that. Derech hamonim, so Rashi explains the use of this particular term. One moment. And that is, it is that custom of those who count. Ma'avirin et hanimnim, they cause to pass by those who are being counted. Ze achar ze, one after the other. V'chein, and likewise we see in Leviticus 27, kol asher ya'avor tachat hashevet, all that passes under the rod. So referring here, I believe, to tithing and counting animals and possibly marking them, but the idea of one at a time, counting them one at a time. V'chein, and likewise in Jeremiah 33, ta'avorna hatzon al yedei moneh, the sheep shall pass by means of counting, one who counts. And now machatzit hashekel b'shekel hakodesh, 1/2 shekel of the holy shekel, the sanctuary shekel. B'mishkal hashekel, this is specifically the weight of the shekel, shekatzavti lacha, that I have established for you, lishkol bo, to weigh out, shkalei mikdash, those shkalim that are going to be applied to the sanctuary. And ke'egon, for example, shkalim ha'amurim beParshat Arachin. There is a section called Arachin, which is to the end of the book of Leviticus, where they talk about evaluations of people. If you wanted to donate your value to the sanctuary, there are certain stipulated values depending on whether it's a man or a woman and how old they are, etc. And that's referring to in how many shkalim, usdei achuzah, and likewise a field that is your inheritance. And if you wanted to, again, give its value or evaluate it and donate it in that particular way. So for sacred donations, Esrim Geira HaShekel, 20 Geira is the shekel. Achshav Piresh Lacha, and now he specifies for you, or he explains to you, Kamahu, what the value was of this shekel. Geira, so he explains the word Geira. Lashon Ma'ah, it has the connotation of a small coin. V'chein b'Shmuel, in Samuel 1, the book of Samuel, chapter 2, Yavo l'hishtachavot lo, okay, he came to bow to him, prostrate himself to him, l'agurat kesef, in order to have a small, there we go, money field of silver, the kikar lechet, and a loaf of bread. You have to go back to that chapter. I believe it's to the end of that chapter, which talks about in order to have some kind of service performed, they had to do this. I think this is referring to the sons of Eli. But the point is, so it's interesting. I don't know. At one point, I know the Israeli currency, the smallest unit of that currency was called an agura, but the Israeli currency has changed a lot over the years. And there's been unbelievable. Yeah, I'm sorry.
I have a comment, because the verbiage of the weight of the half shekel rather than the worth of the half shekel takes into account that it is the weight of the precious metal that continues to have value throughout time, not because it's not attached to the worth of the half shekel.
Right. Well, of course, back then coins were minted according to their actual bullion value.
Exactly.
Right? They're not, current coins are like paper money.
Well, that's why we were talking about something completely different the other day, not about the weight and of the value of the metal. We were talking about the worth of the coin, not taking inflation or whatever into consideration. The weight of the metal stands throughout time.
Actually, though, it doesn't necessarily. Silver doesn't have the worth that it used to. So where you don't have the inflation and recession of this kind of modern economy, but you do have the fact that those are kind of like commodities, and there's still some degree of rise and fall in their values.
Yeah. So.
Right, so but the weight itself,
they're not any more reliable necessarily as a currency than modern money.
Except, okay, I'll go into that. Okay.
Tisa, okay, the difference is this, that they have intrinsic value.
Exactly.
That's the difference, is that there is intrinsic value to the coinage back then.
According to the time and cultural acceptance.
Right, but absolutely. But nevertheless, it's still intrinsic, whereas current coins are simply, whatever it's accepted. It's not
why did silver lose its value if it was intrinsic? Nobody cares about silver anymore. It's being dumped. It has hardly any value.
That's not true.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I have silver in my possession that I have trouble dealing with. It is definitely true.
No, we're talking about people who, Lisa and I, who can collect silver, take it in, melt it, and get money for it. And it goes up and down. It's currently trending up.
Yeah.
Oh, that's good.
Oh,
But it's not nearly as up as it was, even in my lifetime.
no, you're wrong. There was one time when it was 50, but that was for such a brief moment in time.
Right. Somebody was trying to corner the market is what was happening.
The Hunt brothers, I think.
Yes, exactly. I remember that.
In the last,
Yeah, it was the Hunt brothers. Yeah, that's one of the most famous.
but in the last 20 years, it's up over 500%.
Yeah, my son is researching it and really, thinks that that's where, to go. What's going down is the value of things made out of silver.
Correct. Yeah.
So, the charts that I see show it peaks in the early 2010s and then way down
Right.
to more current times, way down. So, and the peak was kind of looking like a fluke peak. It wasn't what it was before, and it wasn't like what it is now, according to the charts that I see.
Okay, so I want to sort of back off on the conversation because we could spend the rest of the time probably talking about this, but I think there is a difference. When I say intrinsic, okay, it means that it's not an arbitrary value placed on it. So paper money was worth the paper it's printed on, okay? Then that would be its intrinsic value. But $100 bill is printed on the same amount of paper and uses approximately the same amount of ink as a dollar bill, okay? Whereas back here, a one shekel silver piece, okay, as opposed to a 10 shekel silver piece, the 10 shekel silver piece would have 10 times the amount of silver in it. And that's what I mean by intrinsic value. Whereas the coinage that we now have, I think it's a decent way to say, has arbitrary value. Whereas silver, even if it goes up and down, has to do with market value, okay? And not simply arbitrary. Okay. So anyway, we could get into this more, but the truth is you can use the silver and what they would do. In the case of the Adanim, they would melt the silver and make the sockets out of them for the tabernacle. By the way, I think someone needs to mute, if they will, please. Okay, so Isrim Ge'ah. So we're talking about the word, the Ge'ah is a reference to, and the terminology itself is a reference to a small coin. So Isrim Ge'ah HaShekel, this particular shekel is worth 20 Ge'ah. Shahashekel Hashalem, because a complete shekel, he gives you a little bit of monetary value here, of the equivalence, right? Arba zuzim. So one zuz is a fourth of a shekel, right? 4 zuzim to a shekel. V'hazuz mitchilato, and originally the zuz was worth 5 me'ot, was 5 of these me'ot, these small coins. So that's how you get 20 geras, right? The ma'ah and the gera is the same, essentially the same coin. Ella, however, this is something you would not infer, okay? Ba'u v'hosifu alav, but what the rabbis did, or however they did, v'hosifu alav shtut, they raised it, they gave it an additional amount of value of 1/6. Now you have to understand that the 1/6, and whenever you come across an evaluation of something like coinage, and they say an added 1/6, what they mean is an added 1/5. And the reason why is because if you add 1/6 to the total amount, okay, all right, then it works out to be that it's 1/5 of the total. 1/6 of the total amount is actually 1/5. In other words, it's a 1/6 of the amount itself plus the 1/6, and that is actually 1/5. So they talk about it being, it's like the difference of the profit on the selling price as opposed to the profit on the cost price. That's what we're talking about here. Ve'eluhu l'shesh me'a kesef. So this shekel that they're talking about was it inflated, right, to actually 6 me'as of silver. Umachatzit hashekel hazeh, and it's the half of this particular shekel, she'amarti lach, that I told you, yitnu truma l'Hashem, they should give as a gift to Hashem. So essentially, I know this is sort of detailed and complicated, and you sort of need a pencil and paper to see how this all works out. But they're basically saying that it is a slightly higher amount than the regular shekel. And what they're saying is that the reason for saying it is 20 gerahs to the shekel is to actually tell you that when they're saying the shekel hakodesh, the sanctuary shekel was worth, again, a fifth more than the regular shekel. So I hope this is relatively clear.
By the way, they do still call the divisions of the shekel nowadays in Israel are still called agurot.
Yeah, go ahead. Say, I'm sorry, Shirabeth.
Oh, sorry. I just said that they do still use the word agurot in Israel for for the coins that are the divisions of the shekel.
Right. Are they worth almost anything? Can you get anything for an agura, or is it more for tax?
Well, the 1 agura coin is not, you don't see that anymore at all, but 10 agurot, you get change and you'll get a bunch of 10 agurot coins. And if you save your 10 agurots, it adds up.
Right. But yeah, in and of itself, it's like back in my very early years, you could buy something. We had sterling currency and you could get something for a penny. And they even had a farthing, believe it or not. They had a coin called a farthing, which was 1/4 of a penny, just in terms of inflation and all that kind of good stuff. At any rate, moving on, Kol ha'over al ha'pakudim, all those who will pass by the enrollment, mibin isrim shana v'mala, 20 years old and up, yiten trumat Hashem. Those are the ones who will give this truma to Hashem. And remember, there are 3 trumot that really are referenced here. At any rate, from 20 years old and up, we certainly had some fun with that concept. Limedcha, and probably the next, okay, Khan. Here you are taught, okay, or teaches you here, she'ein pachot mi ben isrim yotze latzava, that someone younger than 20 years old goes out to the army. Okay, you are not enlisted in the army if you're younger than 20. Venimna beklal anashim. Okay, and counted in the general number of people. So that such a person is simply part in general of the population, but is not part of the army. So we wind up with later on in the book of Numbers, where we wind up with 600,000, et cetera, those are all males 20 years old and up. So the general population, you have to think, is more, say, approximately 3 times that, maybe 4 times that, the actual population.
So is that still true in Israel?
I don't think so.
I don't think so either.
Yeah. Shira Beth would be able to tell us. The age
the young people go to the army at age 18.
Yeah, I was going to say, I believe it's 18. Yeah.
Just like here.
Yes. So maybe there's, I don't know. Okay, I could go into a whole thing about maturity, but I'm not going to touch it. I'm going to leave it.
It's interesting that it doesn't even feel the need to mention that women are excluded. It just ignores the fact that they exist, but that's typical.
Okay. So, you can either look at it like that, or you can understand it that the role of women back then, was a lot more, there were a lot more domestic issues, and especially raising the children. They had large families. They generally had large families, and taking care and raising the family and taking care of the household was a huge issue. There are the modernity with things like the invention of the washing machine and other kinds of machinery have totally changed the amount of time taken. I mean, the amount of time you'd have to spend on laundry was unbelievable. Unbelievable.
Well, I'm not referring to necessarily about why they aren't in the army, but that they do another kind of service that also has value, but they're not counted in this type of census, or, you know. And I know we've gone into some of the reasons, but it's just interesting how in the text, it really just doesn't, whether there's, you know, reasons for it or not reasons for it, or, you know, it just doesn't mention.
I understand, but I want to be careful about imposing our own value system onto what's going on here and saying, well, they didn't value women. And I'm not saying there isn't stuff that's far more difficult to have to, quote, defend, but this is not one of those places. I mean, they are talking about people who are going to go out and have to, you know, do battle, do physical battle. And it's not because women are devalued. I mean, even nowadays, I don't believe women actually go into combat, even in the modern Israeli army. Shira Beth, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't know of too many armies where women actually.
They can actually. They
really?
They do have combat units for women now, but it's not. The women don't necessarily expect that of themselves the way the young men expected of themselves.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's more to it than a simplified, you know, judgment call here. Okay. So it's just there was, again, remember there's great concern about counting, about being part of the census. You know, one could equally argue that the reason why the women and children younger than, or young people younger than the age of 20 aren't counted is because it makes everyone vulnerable. And here they have to, you know, in doing that, they now have to have an atonement. And why would we involve more and more people requiring atonement?
So on one, but you know, you kind of said, well, you know, this is about the army and whatever, but then they do mention the age, you know, the age thing. So if, you know, 16-year-olds don't join the army, you know, and it's kind of this is all about the army, then it does really don't need to mention necessarily the age any more than they have to mention the gender.
I'm not sure I understand. Why wouldn't you think that young people of 18 would be enrolled in the army? I mean, if they don't tell you that it's only 20 years old and up, do you not think that that's important information in terms of knowing who's included in the census? Or are you making a different point altogether, possibly?
Well, I'm just not sure if that, you know, I guess because the people then knew that. And the people then knew that, you know, as they knew that women weren't part of it, they also knew that people under 20 weren't part of it.
We wouldn't know it. We wouldn't, and that's not necessarily the case. It could be that here is a completely new idea. I mean, it's all speculation. Don't get me wrong. I wouldn't say that, you know, that there aren't examples where there clearly seems to be gender bias that one has to deal with, okay? But I don't think this would be the example we'd want to pick, you know, for gender bias in the Torah. I mean, I think it's a fairly straightforward statement that it's just 20 years and up who are included in the army. I mean, I wouldn't know it. All right. Now, I know the argument is, well, why don't they count the women? But I think that's the whole point. The whole point is that you might in fact think that young men of less than 20 would be enrolled. That's exactly the point. And that's why it's mentioned. This is actually a logical. The Gemara very, very often has this concept of, you know, why is the statement being made? And the answer is hava amina. That's the technical Aramaic that's used to introduce a phrase that said, because if this wasn't stated, I would have thought. And hava amina means I would have thought. So I think this would be an example of a hava amina, and that's why it tells us that it's 20 years old and up. Okay, let's keep going. There's some also interesting things. And I may, if I have a chance, if I can, check on the next little piece, which is interesting. Because as I recollect, the Torah Tmima comes up with some remarkable statements. But let me see if I can have a chance to do that for tomorrow's lesson.
So you're also saying that there's a difference between what's stated that's explicit versus what's stated that's kind of open to interpretation, right? That's what you're talking about here. Is that correct? And this is one where it's really explicit, not really open to interpretation, something along those lines.
Well, I wish I could say that. It's not that simple, because no matter what is stated explicitly, it's also subject to interpretation.
Yeah, of course. But the intent was to make it more explicit. I should say that. Versus,
I would say that precisely because one might be led to either a question or a false assumption.
Right.
And it's at least trying to remove a false assumption.
Correct. Okay.
All right. Let's go on a little bit more. Ha'ashir lo yirbeh, the wealthy shall not give more. V'hadal lo yamit, and the poor should not give less. Mimachatzit hashekel, from the half shekel. Latet et trumat Hashem, to give the gift of Hashem. Lachaper al nafshotechem, to atone for your souls, or for their souls. But it is your souls. Nafshotechem would be your souls. It looks like a fairly long Rashi here, and it is 7:59. So I'm going to stop here, but I'll make a mark, and possibly this is where we will start tomorrow. And I'll stop the share and open it up to any last thoughts before we begin Shacharit.
Well, I guess this implies that there is no exemption for people based on class.
Right. It does sound like that.
Be here.
Right. And I agree with you. I think that that's definitely what it's sounding like. And that's why it's trying to give an amount of money that would, at least on the surface, it's not sounding like an amount of money that poor people would not be able to afford.
But I mean, no army exemption. Because if that's what the shekel, is counting, that wealthy people have to fight alongside.
You mean you can't pay your way out of having to serve?
Like they do here, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. No, that would be the implication. However, of course, there are all kinds of different tasks that the army requires besides direct combat. Yes,
it also doesn't include people who are infirmed or are blind or anything else. So we would assume that if it's for the army,
yes,
that some of those people would be exempt also, but it doesn't say anything like that.
Okay, so Golda, that's this is good. I mean, we're digging down deep, right? Deeper. And I would say that in those particular cases, there might well be, armies are very complicated things, okay? There are many duties that are involved in trying to, put out an army and put up an army. And certainly there would be non-combat roles that most people, unless of course they were bedridden, et cetera, et cetera.
Right. Just like,
yeah. But
Grandpa's on his deathbed, and I don't think he deserves to have. I don't think he has to pay the half shekel.
I think he does. I think he still does. Yeah. No, at least okay. These are very good questions.
It is, especially the upward age limit. Yeah.
Right, and there isn't one, which
which implies that you do it regardless. I mean, the truth is that everyone requires some kind of atonement for their souls, okay, regardless of their situation, various situations. But the sense I have, and I can only say that, right? I can't say this having researched it thoroughly and to be able to say, definitively, Golda, this is the answer. But it does sound to me as if everyone over the age of 20, every male, I should say, over the age of 20 is required to give. So I will try, and I hope I will have.
No, I get this because it's for the atonement purpose. And that's exactly what that's about, is the atonement purpose. And really not the army. I think they used it later because, oh, gee, we've got a number. Now we know who's how many we got,
Okay. So let me make something else clear, all right? And then I know we need to move into it's past 8 o'clock. The assumption is that they were going to be wandering 40 years in the wilderness. That is not a correct assumption. That is plan B. Plan A was that they were going to maybe take, 2 weeks or whatever it was. Well, it took them, 7 weeks to get to Mount Sinai, maybe another month or two, but not 40 years, maybe another year even. It doesn't matter. But right at this particular point, the next stage would be going into the land of, the land of Canaan and conquering the land of Canaan. They messed it up. Right. So the 40-year wandering was plan B. And that's why, at this particular stage, they wanted to know, it's so important.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying it's not a thing, but yeah.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
it's really because it says in Torah that it's atonement. That's the reason.
Correct.
Therefore, that's the reason. That's why everybody above the age of 20, every
Right.
male above the age of 20 had to do that.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Well, I'm going to stop.
You need us to stay.
It appears not.
Well, one of you can leave.
Well, it looks like do you not have two double?
I may. I don't see them. That's the